Let's go for it. Hi, my name is Nick Cosgrove. Welcome to Let's Talk. I'm joined today by Chuck Thomson. Chuck, how are you?
Super good.
Chuck, I want to thank you so much for making the time to come on today. You are someone, as you know, I've been chasing you down. I really want to interview you because there's so much that you and I can cover. We only have 30 minutes, but I have a feeling that you and I are going to go a little bit longer today. First off, why don't we tell everyone who you are?
I'm a lifetime natural athlete, and I've accomplished far more without the drugs than I ever could have with the drugs. And I'm glad I stayed that way, because if I hadn't have, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. I know that.
Well, you're a lifelong, you say drug-free athlete, but what kind of sport, what sport, for people who don't know, what sport do you compete in?
I compete in bodybuilding contests, and for the last 21 years, I guess, I've been involved in natural bodybuilding competitions, which are drug tested all the time. Okay. So it's most of them are, it's the P test, which follows WADA testing.
Okay.
And one federation I compete for still uses the polygraph to test everyone to get into the shows.
Okay. How many bodybuilding shows have you competed in?
Well, this year has kind of sidetracked me with the
COVID-19 situation. Sure.
With the current situation we're in.
Yeah.
I stand right now at 134 shows.
I'm sorry. You say 134 shows?
Yes.
Wait, how many years have you been competing for?
If I ever get out of the gate this year, this would be my 43rd year competing.
43 years. Wow.
I started competing in 1977.
Oh my God. Wow. I don't know anyone who's, never mind, done 130. I haven't seen anyone, I don't think I know anyone who's done 100 shows.
Well, when I got close to my 100th show, I started looking at longevity in the sport. And I have a list of all of the top guys who have competed in contests. And it's a pretty substantial list. I sit 4th overall with my number of shows. In first place is my buddy Tracy Teitelbaum out of Phoenix, Arizona.
Okay.
He's done 651 shows.
Oh my God.
And the great Carl Marshall, who's an artist and another bodybuilder who's competed a lot. He's done 500 plus shows. And another really good friend of mine is Martin Drake, who runs the AAU out of the United States. And he's done 182 shows.
Okay.
Then there's me at 134. And then behind me, there's Rodney Gaines and Ken Ross, the great Albert Beckles, and one other fellow on their list. So there's only 8 of us that are over the 100 mark.
Do you have a certain number that you want to reach before you stop competing? You're just going to keep going?
Everybody thought when I got to 100 I was going to quit, but it was just a milestone. It wasn't an end point.
Okay.
So I don't really have a number in my head. So I'll take it as far as it will go. The guys ahead of me, both Tracy and Martin, are still competing. So it's going to be a tough road to catch. You know, I've got an outside chance to catch Martin.
Right.
I've got guys like Ken Ross behind me, who's coming up by leaps and bounds.
Yeah.
And so, but Albert Beckles is retired, so I know I can't place any lower than him.
There you go.
So I'll at least be there. And I think there's maybe a couple of other guys that have done over 100 shows, but I can't get numbers out of them.
Oh, I see.
So
you probably lost count.
Well, some of them have, and some of them haven't. I know I've kept track.
Okay.
All my life and that sort of thing. So I had a pretty good idea, and I started off with Matt Park, who was head of the WNBF at that time in Canada. He pointed me in the direction of Milo Sarcev.
I know Milo Sarcev.
He's done a lot of shows. And
Yes.
so that was my start point.
Okay.
And I found out he did 71 shows. And I think I was around 69 at that point.
Okay.
And so that was my start. And as I got looking at all of the major competitors who had done shows, I found Albert Beckles, who had done 112 shows. And that was spread over 5 different decades,
Yes.
which is incredible in
Yes.
terms of his longevity.
Yeah.
And I, if I ever get a contest in this year, then I'll get into the 2020. So that will put me into my 6th decade.
Wow.
So, but even at 5, that's a very small number of us that have done 5 decades.
You mentioned Albert Beckles and Milos Sarcev, and I'm a huge follower of bodybuilding, so I know those names.
Yes.
And now a lot of people don't know those names, but the one thing I want to talk about you is that you are completely drug-free. You've gone in the natural direction.
Yes.
Whereas those bodybuilders, they were openly using, they were enhanced athletes.
Well, kind of the way the drugs have tracked through the sport.
Yeah.
I have a picture of 3 bodybuilders, Eugene Sandow, who is the father of bodybuilding, and the Mr. Olympia trophy is named after him and is in one of his classic poses. And his diet was beef and beer, and that was about the only supplementation he did.
Right.
And then if we leap forward to the 1970s, we have Arnold Schwarzenegger in that group. And there was about 7 or 8 different steroids around at that point, but everybody had kind of a favorite, and that was the one they used. There was nobody really stacking in those days.
Okay.
And then if we leap forward to 2010, we get into the Jay Cutlers and that group.
Sure.
And guys were doing multiple anabolic steroids, human growth hormone, and insulin.
Okay.
And that's what produced the distended bellies and everything else, which took away a lot of the aesthetics from the sport.
Right.
Because, in the old school type of thought was everybody practiced stomach vacuums because that was what you're supposed to do.
Right. There were no bellies on stage back in the 70s and 80s.
Well, you had the great Sergio Oliva, the Myth,
right,
who was incredible. He had the smallest waist of any Mr. Olympia winner, and that was at 28 inches.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and Frank Zane is in second, and he was at 29 or 30, somewhere in there, and then everybody was larger than that.
Yeah. I wanted to just backtrack for a second. When you first started competing in the 1970s, were you ever tempted yourself to go down that route of using steroids?
When I started in 77 competing,
yeah,
I got talked into competing by BJ Annis, who was the son-in-law of Stu Hart, the great wrestling promoter.
Okay. Yeah.
And that whole Hart family.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he talked me into competing in my first show.
Okay.
And I did that, and I was bitten by the bug, and I competed in non-tested shows for 22 years.
Okay.
Because there was really not many other games in town at that point.
So you were competing against people that were enhanced?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
And so I was, I know that there wasn't anybody training harder than I was at that time.
Right.
But, I'd go to the contests, and I was moving slowly up the ranks. My first show I competed in, I finished 16th out of 24.
Okay.
But, I stood next to the great Henry Cocker.
Oh, wow.
And he, everybody said, I'm sure nobody saw me. I said, because everybody was looking at Henry, and I said, but that's okay. I was too.
Yeah, right. Yeah. You were just happy to be there.
Well, yeah. And Henry was a great gentleman, and I learned a lot from him.
Okay.
And he helped me very much in my first show, and I had a chance to reciprocate many, many years later at a big Canada show.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, now you've competed in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. the 2000s, and now we're in past 2010. So you compete, like you said, 4 different decades. Do you think, in your personal opinion, first I want to ask you about the drugs. Do you think there's more emphasis put on the drugs now than there was back in the earlier days?
Yeah, I think that people have gone that route because it's we live in an instant pudding society,
Okay.
and people want the results now. So I think people get on that bandwagon a lot faster now than they did before.
Right.
And that's my only real regret for the people that are competing now, is that most of them didn't stay natural long enough to find out what they could do.
Right.
And they jump on that, and then they go that route. I know I have a list. I call it my death list, and it has 170 bodybuilders, powerlifters, and wrestlers on the list.
Right.
And the youngest one on the list is who died of a massive heart attack at age 22. And that is wrong on so many different levels.
Yeah. What, like you said, why do you think that is right now? Is it the want it now mentality, or is it just with social media? Like, what is it that separates the guys from, say, the 70s and 80s to the guys of today?
Well, the guys in the 70s and 60s and 70s, as the drugs were starting to creep into the sport at that time, the guys in California were in the magazines all the time, so they had to stay in shape all the time.
Right.
So that was the way that was. And I know Arnold wasn't a big steroid user, but he did them to, as he says, hold on to lean muscle mass while he was dieting for shows.
Right.
But he was, if you are familiar with Pumping Iron, which every kid has watched.
One of my favorite movies.
And, you know, he talked about it in there. And he went into the gym to gain weight to compete.
Right.
And most people can't make that claim. I've never been able to make that.
No. Do you think, well, first off, with the way that you train today, is it the same way that you were training back when you were in your 20s and your 30s, or have you redefined your training as you get older?
Well, as an athlete, I've continued to evolve as an athlete. So I'm a different athlete in my 60s than I was in my 50s, 40s, etc.
Okay.
And I've done a variety of programs, and I've over the last few years, I've gone back into the history of the sport, and I'm kind of making my way through the decades.
Right.
I was doing Vince Gironda's 8 sets of 8.
Okay.
With a 15 to 30 second rest in between.
Okay.
And I did that for a couple of years. And by the end of that program, I had my rest time for 3/4 of my exercises down to 10 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah. So I didn't have to do much cardio because it was highly aerobic, the workouts, but very intense too.
Right.
And then after I decided to move on from that, I went into the 1970s, and I have a program that has the best of Dave Draper, Franco Colombo, Frank Zane, Arnold, and so it was a good routine. I trained on that and enjoyed working on that. And I was at the INBA Natural Olympia in last November, and I got a chance to meet in person Leo Costa Jr., who created the Serious Growth System in the 1990s.
Okay.
And I'd gotten a hold of a partial copy of his program in the 90s. They got me started on that, and I was so impressed by it that I wound up sending away for all his courses.
Okay.
And so that's what I'm training on again right now.
It is.
And having a great time visiting this. And I don't know where my training will take me in subsequent years, but this is where I'm at right now.
Are there any exercises that you've had to stop doing, like squats or deadlifts, or any that you just take out of your regular training routine now?
There were many that I had to discontinue because of a birth defect hip and an arthritic shoulder.
Okay.
But about 5 years ago, I discovered a muscle and joint cream called P3,
Okay.
and it's made out in Abbotsford, BC. And it is the best product I've ever used. I'm 67 now,
Yeah.
and I'm pain-free, and I'm back doing squats. I do bench squats because it's safer on my hip.
Okay.
And but I've been able to do bench press again. I can't bench press very much, but I can still do the exercise,
Right. Right.
which is still good.
Have you had any serious injuries in your lifting career?
I've been relatively injury-free. I've had a few things over time.
Okay.
Probably the most severe was in 2003 when I had a partial tear in my infraspinatus tendon, which is part of the rotator cuff
Right.
group there. And that took me out of competition. It shut me down for a whole year.
Right.
I didn't want the surgery because I knew it would take away mobility in the shoulder.
Okay.
And so I tried every type of therapy there was, massage and acupuncture, acupressure, magnetic therapy,
Yeah.
and physiotherapy. And the physiotherapy, I had a really good physio guy, and he would give me, he normally give 1 or 2 exercises for his clients. But for me, I was getting 4 or 5 exercises because I had a larger experience there.
Sure.
And it took me a year
Yeah.
to get back to a point where I could train and sort of look at competition. And I started in January. I had contests listed from February through November.
Okay.
And I started off in that January, and I could do 0 chin-ups.
Right.
And my goal was to do 3 sets of 15 by the time I got to competition.
Right.
So the months kept rolling by, and I was finally able to do a show. It was a qualifier for Worlds in September. So it took me 9 months before I was back to a level where I could actually compete again.
Right.
And the week of that show, I did 2 sets of 15 and a set of 12. So as far as the chin-ups were concerned, so I was quite happy.
You progressed quite well.
Absolutely. And so that got me to the INBA Natural Olympia for the first time.
Okay.
And I competed there, and because I was about 80% competing there, I wondered if I really belonged there. That was the only time I've had any doubts. And so I wound up talking with one of our Canadian judges who was there, and he said, "No, you definitely belong here." So that sent me back to the gym with a renewed vigor and everything else, and it led me to obtaining in 2006 my first world championship, was the INBA Natural Universe competition.
Now, how old were you then?
2006, I was 53.
How many 53-year-olds are winning world championships? Not many.
Well, in the INBA
Yeah.
and the AAU, which I compete for, there's quite a few. We've got some amazing people. You know, the exercise wheel that you go on your knees and you roll out to
Yes.
do abs there?
Yeah.
A good friend of mine is Willie Franco from Guatemala.
Okay.
And Willie does that as part of his routine on stage.
Oh.
He has one that's shaped not like the handles on the outside, the wheel in the middle, but 2 wheels and handle in the middle.
Yeah.
So he does that, and he's able to do that exercise from his feet,
right,
with 1 arm. And
he's putting my posing routine to shame right now. That's incredible.
Well, that's how he starts his routine. He does 3 reps.
Yeah.
With that, he's 68 years old. He's in incredible shape.
Yeah.
And I've seen him do 65 chin-ups.
Incredible.
So, you know, he's just an incredible man, great gentleman.
Yeah.
And fun to compete with.
Chuck, I wanted to ask you, how has your diet evolved over the years? Have you stuck to the same diet plan all these years while you compete, or have you changed that as well?
That's kind of evolved too.
Okay.
Um, Back in the 70s when I started, I got some basic advice. And so it was keeping the carbs to 40 to 60 grams a day.
That's low. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was eating a lot of eggs, a lot of milk, a lot of cottage cheese and stuff like that.
Was it like almost like a keto diet?
It would probably similar to what the keto diet is today.
Okay.
And I went on that, and then in the 80s and 90s, I got into more of a keep the fat low.
Okay.
And the carbs were there. And my prep for a show at that time would have been, I would go on fibrous carbs from Monday to Thursday. And then at Friday at noon, I would start to introduce some starch carbs back in.
Okay.
And and then in the 2000s, mid 2000s, I got involved with Dr. Joe Plomzeski, the diet doc.
Oh, okay. Yes, I've heard about this. Yes. Okay.
And I'd met him in Washington State when I was at a show there. He was there, and Marlon Hospitalis and the Texas Shredder,
Yeah.
So it was an interesting seminar that they put on.
Right.
That was when I first met Dr. Joe, and I wound up working with him a little bit later and from 2007 to 2015. So I worked with him for a number of years.
Okay. And what kind of plan are you following now?
It's kind of my own plan.
Okay.
So I still kind of watch my macros, and my protein is still fairly high.
Yeah.
But not as high as it had been.
Okay.
And the carbs, I kind of have a couple of starch meals a day. Okay. And I still include fruit in my diet and all of this stuff. So it's a more balanced type of diet.
I see. In your opinion, of all the diets you've tried, what worked best for your body?
Watching my macros with Dr. Joe, I probably was the healthiest coming out of a show.
Okay.
Because I can remember the old style method, and I can remember after a show I would wind up with muscle cramps.
Yeah, the post-contest rebound. Yes.
Yeah, and probably the worst one. We sat up and visited till about 4 o'clock in the morning, so I got to bed late. I woke up at 6 in the morning. I felt so good, and then I just took a big stretch.
Yeah.
And then I got a cramp in my quad and hamstring on the same leg.
Oh wow. That must have been painful.
I was out of bed like a shot, but every time I knew what I had to do to straighten out the hamstring, but every time I did that, the quad went. And if I tried to straighten out the quad, the hamstring went. So it took me a while. And by the time I got it sorted out, I was wide awake.
Yeah. What do you attribute your longevity to in this sport? I mean, I don't know anyone who's done 134 shows. I mean, how have you been able to stay so healthy and injury-free all these years?
Well, I think I've managed to stay in the gym, and that's been the big thing. Okay. And even when I had my shoulder injury, I still stayed in the gym. Right. I never got out of that habit. I did all my physio and that in the gym.
Right.
And so when I came back to train, I was ready to go, and it still excites me to be in the gym.
It does. You haven't lost your passion for competing or lifting?
No. And I go in there and I train, and I train as hard as most of the other guys in there, not as heavy as they do, but I still am able to get a good workout. And
right. Well, I mean, you know that the weight is not everything, and especially in bodybuilding, the judges don't care how much you weigh on stage. They don't even care how much you squat, how much you bench press. You're being judged purely on how you look.
It's on the aesthetics. That's why we're what I call artist athletes.
Right.
Stuff in the gym is the athletic part.
Yeah.
What we do on the day of a show is the artistic part.
Yes, exactly. Chuck, I want to ask you, with COVID-19 going on, I mean, you're based out of Edmonton right now. I'm here in Vancouver, British Columbia. We're both equally affected. Gyms are closed. What are you doing? Stay in shape.
I'm training at home.
You are, okay.
And I have, I have a fair amount of equipment, and if we're still got snow. It's actually snowing today.
It is.
Welcome to spring.
Yes, yeah. We're pretty lucky here. We have no snow.
I know. So I've got some stuff that I can set up in the garage, spot rack and stuff like that. But I have a dumbbell set in my home, and I've been doing that and some other stuff. So I have enough stuff that I can keep going for a long time.
So you're not letting this situation stop you from just like calling it quits for the next few months?
Not at all.
That's impressive.
Haven't missed a workout.
Are you, on your business scale, are you retired now, or do you still work?
I could retire.
You could, okay.
And my plan was to sort of retire at the end of this school year, but I've decided to go one more year.
So, just so people know, what do you do for a living?
I'm a school teacher.
Okay.
But I teach at a maximum security young offender center.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I teach criminals.
Really?
I don't teach them to be better criminals. I just teach them math and shop.
Okay. And you've been doing that for a long time?
I've been at the Young Offender Center for 10 years now.
Okay. So one thing I want to talk to you too, you're a bit of a bodybuilding historian. And
Yes.
I love looking at your Facebook posts because you always have something, you know every single Mr. Olympia. I consider myself a bit of a historian as well because, I mean, I've been following the sport for the past 20-something years.
Yes.
But I wanted your opinion on, from decade to decade, and let's start going back as far as the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and until today. How has the bodybuilding world evolved, in your opinion?
It was originated in the mid 60s. Joe Weider created it to offer the Mr. Universe winners an opportunity to still compete and make money.
Right.
That was the original plan.
Okay.
But the Mr. Olympia winners were getting like $1,000.
Wasn't very much, no.
At that time, and that stayed for probably 10 years.
Right. Okay.
Before it started to increase.
Yeah.
And then, Larry Scott, the legend, was the winner of the first two shows, and then he retired after that. Okay. And then Sergio Oliva won the next three,
right.
And was actually one of the few people who actually beat Arnold.
I remember that, yes. Well, I don't remember. I remember reading that. I wasn't alive yet.
Well, and the way the sport kind of evolved in the 60s, you had Larry Scott won the first two. Sergio competed uncontested in 1968. Nobody went up against him.
Right. They just knew he was too good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then Arnold was in there in 69, and Sergio beat him for the title then. It was close. It was a 4-3 score at that time.
Right.
And then in 1970, you had Arnold, who took over then.
Yeah.
And it's funny because Dave Draper was another name in the late 60s.
Right.
Who was in all the magazines. He was working as a stock boy for Weider.
Okay.
And he was paid as a stock boy, but Weider had him featured prominently in all of his magazines. He made some of the beach blanket movies that were popular in the 60s.
Yeah.
And it's a firm belief of mine that if Dave Draper would have enjoyed competing more,
yeah,
which he didn't, that I don't think Arnold would have been as prominent as he was.
I've heard that before.
Yeah,
physique was phenomenal. Yeah.
But Dave didn't like to compete, and Arnold came in, and he brought Franco over in the late 60s. And Franco was originally a bricklayer and got Arnold a job doing that. And Arnold took all his money that he was making from his job and he put it into real estate in Santa Monica.
Right. You're smart.
He was. I mean, and he got himself a university degree, and he won from 1970 to 1975.
Right.
Was Arnold's reign there. And the 1975 contest is important because it was the basis for the movie Pumping Iron.
Yeah.
It took place in Pretoria, South Africa.
Right.
And Lou Ferrigno was prominent in the movie there, and so was Serge Nubret, and a few of the other guys were featured prominently. One of my favorites, Robbie Robinson, was in it.
He's still training today, Robbie Robinson.
He is. Still looks good, and some of the guys have stayed with it. I know Bill Pearl is 85 or 86 now.
Right.
There.
Yeah.
He's still active.
He's still going.
So, you know, and I had a chance this past November to meet Tony Pearson.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. He's still in phenomenal shape as well.
Yeah.
I follow him on Instagram.
Yeah, and so I met him at that time. We had a chance to chat, and it was really good. He's written a book called Driven, which is a great history of his bodybuilding career.
Right.
And his life that he went through, the physical and emotional abuse that he went through as a child, and everything else that led him into wrestling and then into the bodybuilding.
Okay.
And then he ran afoul of Joe Weider and was told he would never win.
There's a lot of politics in bodybuilding, right?
It was a huge number of politics then, and Weider was the architect of all of that.
Right.
And so, but he had the magazines going, and the IFBB was formed in Montreal in the bedroom of Joe and Ben Weider.
Right.
Ben got Canada, and Joe took the United States.
Yeah.
And that was the start of the IFBB. And but it was interesting because you take a look at the winners of the Olympia as you start to move through.
Yeah.
You have a white champion and a black champion, followed by a white champion, followed by black, and it just kind of worked that way all the way through.
Right.
And you know, then you had, but yeah, Arnold did a great job in terms of promoting himself and the sport, and he took bodybuilding out of the garages and basements and put it into mainstream society.
That's what I wanted to ask you, because when you got into the sport, it was the late 70s or mid 70s.
It was 1970 when I started.
1970.
I started out with the Charles Atlas course.
Right.
And that was my start. So this marks my 50th year training.
So when you first got into the sport, it was still kind of a cult sport, though, because you started competing, I think, what you said in 77. Was that
77, right? Yeah.
Okay. So in your opinion, when did people start coming to the gym more? Because when you were training, it was probably primarily just men in the gym. Was that right? Or there were women too? Pretty much.
It was that way when through most of the 70s and into the early 80s, but with the later 70s and the early 80s, for sure, saw the women start to be involved in the competitions.
Okay.
And it was interesting because the women affiliated themselves with the male bodybuilders.
Okay.
In terms of contests, because they didn't think they were strong enough to host their own shows.
Right.
And as the sport has evolved, we're now at a point where the women are carrying the show.
Pretty much.
Women bodybuilders, women bodybuilding is almost dead. And but the others, the figure, the physique, the bikini girls, they're the lifeblood of the sport now.
They are. And I remember even when I first started competing, there was no bikini, no figure, no physique. It was just women's bodybuilding and men's bodybuilding.
Yes.
And
then what happened was Um, Fitness came next,
Right, right,
and fitness involved gymnastics and dance.
right.
And then came figure, because that was for the girls who didn't have a gymnastics or dance background.
Right.
So figure came in, and then you had the physique show, girls come in, and that was a little softer look.
Yeah.
You didn't want the hardness of the figure girls.
Right, right.
And then the bikini girls, which had its basis in the 1940s, when it was basically just a TNA show. It was part of every bodybuilding competition.
Oh, was it?
And that took place at the beach in Santa Monica.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I didn't know this.
Nelson.
Yeah.
It took place from there.
Interesting.
But you know, the girls have done just a tremendous job in terms of getting involved and trained just as hard as the guys do, and have been really good for the sport.
I want your opinion before we leave today. I want your opinion if you think the sport itself is headed in the right direction, or do you think that it's headed in the wrong direction, the way it's going right now? Let's take bodybuilding.
Bodybuilding, men's bodybuilding, headed in the wrong direction. I think we're at a crossroads right now, and I think there is a move towards moving back to a more aesthetic physique.
So, bringing in the men's classic physique. Is that a good move?
In the classic physique, which is sort of looking at the 1970s as the ideal.
Right, okay.
And then the men's bodybuilding, where they're looking at, I think, more drug testing to kind of get us away from the extended waist and everything else to a more aesthetic physique.
Yeah.
Because Lee Haney was a big man, and so was Mike Christian, who you'll see in my future retrospective.
There's some of my favorites. Mid-'80s, Lee Haney,
absolutely,
8-time Mr. Olympia. Tiny little waist, big chest, big shoulders.
Yeah,
guts.
That was Lee Haney, and then Ronnie Coleman matched that number.
Yeah.
And it's the general consensus that Ronnie Coleman is the best Mr. Olympia ever.
What's your opinion on that?
Well, for me, it's Frank Zane.
You like the aesthetics. Yeah.
The aesthetics, and that's kind of my game. I've pretty good aesthetics.
Right.
Good symmetry.
Yeah.
And that's my game. And I come in pretty lean, so that helps too. I just don't have, at my age, the ability to build any real significant mass.
You've got the muscle maturity, though.
I do have muscle maturity, and that counts for a lot.
It does.
That's why I can hang with the young guys. I can't always beat them, but it's interesting when I compete in our local contests and that, because sometimes I can't beat the old guys, but I can beat the young guys, and most of the time I can't beat the young guys, and I hold my own against the old guys. But with the local contest, the age categories, Masters is 40 and up, so I'm giving up as much as 27 years in the Masters competition. And the most I'd given up in a show, I gave up 47 years to one of the competitors I had in the open class.
Right. I think it's super impressive. Your track record's impressive. And that's why I want to have you on again, because I actually want to go into a few more things with you when it comes to bodybuilding. I'd like your opinion on quite a few, especially as the sport continues to evolve. And not just in bodybuilding, but also with bikini, figure, because you've been around the sport for a long time.
Absolutely.
And I really think your opinion actually is really, really important, and it's going to be really interesting to hear your views on how the sport's changed.
Well, I'm still a fierce competitor, but I'm also a huge fan of the sport.
I know you are.
And so that you know, I do that, and as I say, with this COVID-19 and going around, I have a lot of extra time at home, and so that's what's produced this retrospective on the Olympias. I did that once before.
Yeah.
But it was 2014 to 15, somewhere in that range. It was several years ago.
Right.
So I decided it was time to move on again.
Well, then that means I'm definitely going to get you on again, right? No, nothing else to do, because I can pick your brain for like at least another hours.
Absolutely.
But for now, I'm going to let you go, and I want to thank you so much for spending this time to come on and tell me about your competition history and just give us a little insight to someone who's done 134 shows.
You're welcome. I enjoy it.
And I'm sure once COVID-19 is passed, we'll see you go up to 135, 6, 7, 8, keep going, right?
Well, my original goal was to get up to 144 this year, and then that would set me up to get to 150 the next year. But
yeah,
you know, I did 12 shows last year, which I thought was absolutely insane.
Yes.
And that came on the heels of doing 10 the previous year, which I thought was absolutely nuts.
Right.
And then, but I managed to scale it back to 12 the following year.
Scale it back. Don't want to do too much.
Well, I had 8 shows on my list, but I make a list all the time.
Right.
Shows, and I had highlighted the ones that I was going to do, which was 8 of them.
Yeah.
And but when I go to if I go to the INBA and the AAU shows in Vegas in November, I'll be down there for about 10 days, and I can do as many as 5 shows. There's 5 different organizations that have shows in Vegas at that time. So
you can
depending
just line
on
them all up then. Yeah.
how they fall,
Sure.
I could do 5 at one time.
Awesome.
That's
well, I want more. I want to talk to you more, so I'm definitely going to bring you on again. And I have so much more to talk to you though. But
sure.
For now, I'm going to let you go. Chuck, enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you very much.
You too. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you spending your time to talk to me today.
You're welcome.
Okay. Have a great weekend, Chuck. We'll see you later on.
You bet.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.